Of all the forms of media out there, film is probably one of the most influential forms there are. It's capable of spreading things as major as ideologies and movements, to things as small as themes and genres. Actually, wait, themes and genres are definitely not small things. What am I talking about? Okay, I'm already getting sidetracked. Point being, film has way more influence than you might have realized. And I feel like one of the ultimate culminations of the influence that film has is the 2023 film Nemesis Blue. In this film, we can see just how impactful various films have been on the creator, through both the references scattered all throughout the movie, as well as all the themes and storytelling techniques used. For example, throughout the whole film, we can see just how impactful the 1931 film M is on the creator, as we can both see it physically being shown in the movie, as well as there being parallels between Dr. Ludwig and the antagonist of M, Hans Beckert. In M, Hans is a serial killer who claims he has no control over his actions, and that something inside him is forcing him to do his killings. Whereas in Nemesis Blue, we can see that throughout the film during the scenes with Dr. Ludwig, it's heavily implied that much like Hans Beckert, Dr. Ludwig sometimes seems to lose control of himself, and some unknown forces making him a deranged killer. Now, another parallel we can draw is that they're both German. That was such a bad joke, I am so sorry. It's one of the many reasons I find Nemesis Blue to be such a cinematic masterpiece. Though, referencing previous films isn't the main thing that makes this film so amazing. It's also the way it adapts existing TF2 lore and game mechanics into the overarching storyline of the film. For example, one of the most creative ways this film adapts an existing game mechanic into the film is of course the overarching theme of the respawn machine. See, as with nearly every multiplayer shooter game, there's a respawn mechanic. And most of the time, it's not really a question why someone can get blown apart and an identical clone of that person can just appear seconds later. However, with Nemesis Blue, it takes this rather mundane game mechanic and provides an in-universe explanation for it in a very creative way, by explaining it as a machine that the Mann brothers commissioned, and exploring the psychological impacts that respawning has on all the mercs. It's honestly a very fascinating concept that I feel like most people hadn't even considered until Nemesis Blue came out. As I said earlier, film is very influential, and with the popularity of Nemesis Blue, whether people realize it or not, the concept of a respawn machine, and particularly TF2, has now been introduced into their minds. And the series I'll be covering today explores this exact concept. Don't join Team Red. Don't Join Team Red is distinctly very different than other forms of TF2 horror, in the sense it's more along the lines of an in-universe horror series than an out-of-universe horror series like Server Blight, for example. Of course, the other thing that sets it apart is that it uses the famed analog horror format. Okay, well, actually, that's a bit of a lie. The series only uses the analog horror format for like the first couple of installments, and even then, the analog horror aspects are used very sparingly. Regardless, it's honestly really cool that the creator could turn such an unserious story like TF2's into something that's actually really unsettling. But do you want to know what I find really unsettling? It's the fact you haven't subscribed yet! Woo! Woo! You want to subscribe so badly! Okay, but for realsies, please do subscribe. It helps you out way more than you realize. Also, consider dropping a like, and let us know you want to see more videos like this in the future. Anyways, enjoy the video. Oh, also, consider being a channel member. Thanks. Before we get into the series, as always, be sure to watch the series on your own before watching my video. The link to the playlist is in the description down below. Be sure to show the creator lots and love support. They've clearly worked very hard in the series. As of recording this, there's currently 6 installments in the series. Hi, Future Marcy here. Since I dragged my feet on editing this video for so long, a new hour-long installment for the series just released. And a teaser for the installment after just dropped. So if you want me to make a follow-up video on the series in the future where I cover these new episodes, let me know in the comments down below. I swear it won't take me 3 months to edit like this one did. Anyways, love you all, back to the video. The first one being titled is just, Don't Join Team Red. This video opens with an ad from Redmond Man, encouraging people to join Red Team to send Blutarch to hell, offering up a very large amount of cash as payment. The advertisement then ends with a call to action saying join now and get rich, with a noble disclaimer at the bottom saying that Redmond is not responsible for injury, loss of life, and mental disorders. We'll see why that's notable soon enough. Before the scene changes, for a brief moment, the text that says get red, get rich changes to get red, get dead. I mean, hey, at least it sounds catchy now. After the scene cuts to static, we then see a warning from an unknown member of the Red Team, seemingly sent into the past to warn people not to join the Red Team. Oh my god, wait, that's just like the title of the series! Roll credits! Okay, but on a more serious note though, this warning explains why joining the red team is such a bad idea, and it all revolves around the aforementioned respawn machine. See, according to this unknown narrator, the respawn machine clones and revives the dead, but as you can probably imagine, the process of respawning and seeing clones of yourself can be insanely mentally taxing. In fact, this process has been so taxing to the point where we can see it's driven some of the mercs mad, and we see a photo of the soldier about to game end himself. We then see for just a single frame a close-up of the soldier's face, with repeating text just saying "end me." After we hear the shotgun firing, the warning continues where we see that the series is referring to the characters by their canonical names, and that the medic is being referred to as Dr. Ludwig. In this part of the warning, it says that Dr. Ludwig went mad trying to save the mercs, and the scene suddenly cuts to the medic in a boarded up room with his eyes seemingly gouged out. The warning then continues where it's revealed that the unknown narrator spent the past 20 years building some sort of machine that can send the warning into the past. And the next photo we're shown reveals that the unknown narrator is almost definitely the engineer. According to the engineer, nearly everyone went mad, and the only thing keeping most of them together was the promise of new items and cosmetics. You know, I feel like an analogy can be made here about how this is similar to how the only thing keeping the TF2 player base from quitting the game is the promise of new cosmetics getting added. Anyways, the installment then ends with a final call to action not to join the red team, before the scene cuts to stack with a faint image of the medic with no eyes, and the video returning to the ending of the advertisement made by Redmond. To be honest, for this first episode, there really isn't much for me to break down or analyze. This episode is primarily just a world-building installment that lays out what the plot of the series will be revolving around. That being, of course, the respawn machine. In this installment, we learn that most of the red team has been driven mad by respawning so many times. Most notably, the soldier and the medic, where the medic has been driven so mad that he seems to have gouged out his own eyes. To be fair though, with the pictures shown this episode, we can absolutely understand why they've been driven so mad, especially the soldier, as he's been shown to see an exact clone of himself as well as an entire pile of bodies of demo men. For now though, the only thing we can really speculate on from this installment is, why was the medic seemingly sealed away in a boarded up room? Like, the madness caused by the respawn machine seemed to cause him to be more of a danger to himself than to anyone else. But maybe in a later installment we'll learn just why he ended up where he did. So let's move on to the next installment, that one being clones. This installment opens with another advertisement from Redmond, which ends up being revealed to be a clip from a Blue Team informational video about propaganda, and that Redmond is your enemy. After this informational video, we see more narration from the engineer who says that his warning didn't work, and then shows a recording of something that happened the day before. This recording in question initially just seems to be of the scout who's driven mad, bashing his head against the engineer's machine. However, when he turns towards the camera, we see that he actually has no face, and is holding a gun. Before the scout is able to shoot the engineer draws his pistol faster, and before he shoots the scout, we see just for a couple frames what seems to be the scout's final thoughts, where he thanks the engineer for putting him out of his misery. After that sequence, the engineer contextualizes things further, by explaining that the creatures like the scout appeared after he sent his warning. In fact, these mutant mercs have been shown to be such a problem that characters like the sniper have to take night watch to keep them at bay. It almost seems like these mutants are sort of animalistic, based on how they react when a flare gets shot at them. Now, strangely, after this clip is shown, we learn that somehow the medic is back to normal. What the fuck do you mean he's, quote, back to normal? His ass had no eyes and was totally in a state of mania when we last saw him. Something definitely feels off here. Well, regardless, we also learn the Demo Man seems to be able to sense these mutants somehow, and refers to them as devils. We're then shown a photo of the Demo Man seemingly explaining his sense of the so-called demons, where the medic is seen in the background laughing at him. However, we then see intermittent flashes of the gouged out eyes that we saw the medic have in the last installment. After that photo, we then see the medic has much more reasonable explanation of what these creatures are, and they've been created because of the cloning machine being overworked, and it creates these defective clones. The episode then ends with the engineer concluding that stopping the machine will mean that the scout and soldier can maybe be saved, where we then see a photo of the mutated scout and soldier. And in this photo, for just one frame, we can see what appears to be the thoughts of the scout and soldier, begging for peace and to be saved from their suffering. So in this episode, we learn that the process of respawning isn't just driving the mercs mad, it's actually mutating them. The curious thing about this, however, is that the mutated mercs seem to be attacking the non-mutants against their will. As we can see with the frame-long zoom-in shots of the mutants, they seem to be begging for death. However, this then raises the question of if the act of respawning is driving the mercs mad, or if it's something else that's causing this aggression. We do know that at least at first, the act of respawning and cloning seems to be taking its mental toll on the mercs. But at least as far as we're aware, they never pulled a gun on one of their teammates like the scout did. Now, another thing I want to point out is how strange it is that the medic is seemingly back to normal. It's definitely implied that something is wrong here with the medic, but it's not really explained in this video what exactly it is that's wrong with him. It's more than likely one of two things. That being either he's still insane and healed his eyes with his medigun, and is feigning sanity to perform some malicious act, or it's a clone of him that somehow infiltrated the group of sane mercs. Regardless, it seems like the medic has to be plotting something, but we probably won't know what it is until later. Now, another thing I want to talk about is I find it a bit curious that the demo claims he can sense mutants and calls them devils. If my memory of TF2 lore is still correct, of all the mercs, Demo Man has definitely had the most paranormal experiences out of everyone, in that his eye socket was cursed by Marasmus. Now, the reason why I specifically brought up this point about his eye socket is that in one of the photos of the Demo Man, he seems to be pointing towards his eye patch while explaining his sense of the clones. So this could mean the curse Marasmus put on Demo makes it so he can really see paranormal things such as devils. If that's the case, then maybe there really is some validity to his claim that the mutants are demons. If these mutants are devils, then it could explain the thoughts these mutants have. Perhaps these clones are being possessed by some sort of devil against their will. But I think I'm jumping the gun a bit by saying these clones are being possessed by devils. Is what I would say if there wasn't something else going on in this installment that pushes the idea that there's something demonic or paranormal going on here. And that, of course, is this image in the Blue Team informational video. It could totally be written off as a piece of propaganda to push the idea that Redmond is such a villain to the Blue Team that he's basically a demon. However, with everything I just explained about the Demo Man and his theory about the clones, I feel like this depiction of Redmond holds some form of significance. Now, I don't necessarily think that Redmond himself is a demon. However, given everything we've deduced so far, it really wouldn't be too far-fetched to assume he potentially made some sort of deal with the devil. I mean, hey, we know the afterlife is canon in TF2, and it is canonical that the medic made a deal with the devil, so it's definitely plausible that Redmond also made a deal with the devil, and it likely has something to do with the respawn machine. But for now, this is all speculation. Hopefully the next installment will give us some more concrete answers. So let's move on to the next video, that being Infiltrator. This episode opens with another message from the engineer, where he's providing an update on the situation that's unfolding. The engineer reveals that the machine that he's been using to transmit his messages has been messing with nearby electronics, and that the medic is very interested in the machine. Once again, his gouged-out eyes flashes onto him for a few frame-long intervals. After rationalizing that the medic's curiosity is simply him just being a man of science, the scene then changes to a chat log between the spy and engineer. In this chat log, the spy reveals that he's outside the base where he's collected some intel, and the engineer revealing that the number of mutated clones have reached the point where they've surrounded the entire Red Team base. The engineer then contextualizes the situation further in his message to the past, where he states that the mutants have gotten a lot more aggressive, and have been charging at the normal mercs while shooting at them, thus forcing the normal mercs to shoot back at them. The only issue, however, being that whenever a mutant gets killed, the more they mutate from respawning. One of the new mutations that the engineer points out is that some of them can talk now, and he plays a record. Jesus fucking Christ, what is that thing? Here we can see both the engineer and Pyro shaking while pointing their guns at the scout, and like, can you really blame them? I'd probably curl up in a ball and cry if I was confronted by this thing. Another concerning detail that we learn about is that apparently at night, when they aren't charging at the normal mercs, they've also been spotted at night shooting each other to force further mutations. The engineer then mentions that these mutants have gotten a lot sneakier, and they set up some new sentries and blind spots that will attack anything that spots, including the normal mercs, as it's the only way for the sentries to shoot the mutants. Surely this won't have any future ramifications whatsoever. In the engineer's update to the past, he also mentions that Demo Man has been refusing treatment from the medic, accusing him of being a devil. In this photo, we see for a couple frames the medic again with gouged out eyes, but also something that backs up my theory about Demo's missing eye, and that's his eye patch glowing green during these brief frame-long flashes. After that, the engineer comments on the fact that the spy should be arriving soon, and that's when he realizes a mistake with the new sentries. He wasn't certain if the spy got his message about the sentries he set up. And just like that, Chekhov's gun gets fired. Or, I guess in this scenario, Chekhov's sentry. Once we hear the sentries fire at him, we can see both the spy's mangled body, as well as his final thoughts for a couple frames, where he expresses his feelings of betrayal and relief. This relief, however, is based on something pretty worrying, and that's the relief he feels about not having to face the mutants he's seen in the hills, which are apparently so bad he prefers this fate over having to face them. Despite shock over the spy's death, there's something else that disturbed the engineer, and that's what was in the intel the spy brought. Although it's not explicitly stated, it's heavily implied that the mutants really are related to demons in some way. We then see the Demo Man rambling about how he was right this entire time, and as he brings up the medic, he gets domed by him. With his cover blown, the clone medic then tries to shoot the engineer, but everyone in the room drew faster, and shot him before he could get the engineer. With this revelation that the medic was a clone, the engineer starts to wonder what happened to the real medic. Though, if we're assuming that medic wasn't the medic we saw in the first installment, then that almost definitely means that the real medic is still in that boarded up room. During his pondering of what happened to the real medic, we see for a couple frames some of the engineer's thoughts, where he expresses remorse over having accidentally betrayed the spy. His message then ends with him expressing his paranoia about the remaining 3 mercs, as now he doesn't know who is and isn't a clone infiltrating the group. The episode then ends with an altered version of the image shown in the Blue Team informational video, which previously said, "Redmond is your enemy," but now it says Redmond is our enemy. In his altered image, one key thing to take note of here is what seems to be a horde of the mutants the spy saw in the hills before returning to the base. Then, the episode ends. So, this installment is definitely very interesting, as it confirms some of our suspicions, most notably, Demo Man's cursed eye socket being able to identify the malicious clones. This of course also has some major implications, as it means that these clones really are demonic in nature, and that there's something very paranormal going on here. What that thing is, I'm not really sure yet, but all of it seems to point back to Redmond and the respawn machine. This is, after all, the second time Redmond has been seen depicted as a demon, and this time it's outside the context of being blue team propaganda. So it definitely seems to reinforce the notion that Redmond did some sort of deal with the devil to allow the mercs to respawn. Seeing as how we know the mutant mercs desire to be put out of their misery, I feel like it's not too much of a stretch to say that when these clones are created, they get possessed by a demon, and that's why these clones are so malicious. However, there does seem to be an exception to these malicious clones, and that's this horrifying scout creature. Up until this point, every single one of the clones have been violent or aggressive towards the normal mercs, but the scouts seemingly never end up attacking them. And it also seems like the mercs are aware of the fact that the scout clone seems at least a little bit more docile than the rest of the clones, as despite them being scared absolutely shitless as most people would, they never end up actually shooting it. But this then raises the question of why the scout in particular isn't hostile like the rest of the clones. My best theory for now is that for one reason or another, this clone never ended up actually getting possessed by a demon, so technically this is a real scout. This could totally be a stretch, and maybe I'm reading way too much into this, so let me know in the comments what you think. Am I onto something here, or am I onto absolutely nothing? Now, something else I feel like is absolutely worth bringing up is a big elephant in the room, and that's of course the clone medic. As the title of this installment implies, the medic was a clone who infiltrated the base of the normal mercs. But this raises a pretty important question, and that's of course, where's the real medic? As I said before, the last we've seen of him was inside that boarded up room. So does this mean that the infiltrator medic was that medic that we saw in that room? Or does that mean that the real medic died in that room, got cloned, and created this new infiltrator medic? It's honestly not too much of a stretch to assume that the infiltrator medic was the medic we saw in the first installment, as intermittently throughout the past couple installments, we see flashes of the infiltrator medic having the gouged out eyes that we saw the medic in the boarded up room have. However, there's also the possibility that this infiltrator was in fact not the medic that we saw in the first installment, and that he's simply just a cloned version of the medic. The only issue with this theory, though, is that it's not really explained how cloning or respawning works in the series. Cause, on one hand, we have all these scout and soldier clones who have gone mad, with the quote-unquote real scout and soldier seemingly being lost to the respawn machine. But at the same time, we see at the very least one mutant clone heavy, and we already know that the heavy is one of the quote normal mercs. That is, of course, unless he's a clone just like the infiltrator medic. But even still, in the first installment we did see that multiple instances of the same merc can be present at the same time, as we can see in this picture of the soldier looking at a clone of himself. But wait a minute. What the fuck is the point of having a respawn machine if you can just clone people already? The logic of this is totally making my head hurt. I definitely think this might have been a bit of an oversight from the creator. Regardless, the last thing I want to bring up is the mutants and spy clones you see in the hills. We only got a glimpse of what they looked like at the end of this episode, but it definitely has me wondering what could be so bad about these mutants. The only thing that really is to go off of that we can maybe infer as the reason why the spy was so worried is the fact that there's just so many of these mutants. Though, that's just my guess. Hopefully in the next installment we can get some more concrete answers. So, let's move on to the next video, that being Conquerors. This installment opens with a shot of something that's very reminiscent of the film Nemesis Blue, and that's one of the mutants being created in the respawn machine. As the door opens, we see something a bit odd, and that's how there's 3 teleporters in front of the respawn machine. This could explain how the clones have supposedly been surrounding the normal merc space so easily. We then see the UI of the cloning machine, where we get to see just how bad the situation is with the machine. Like, holy shit! Over 3,400 clones in the queue? No shit, there's a high risk of defects. My god! After this highly defective soldier spawns, we see that next in the queue is a spy. And unlike the soldier with its 22% accuracy with his cloning, the spy on the other hand has a much better 81 to 92% accuracy with his cloning. Likely because his normal self was just killed, which means that he hasn't been through the ringer as much as everyone else. However, before we can see the results of his cloning, the scene then switches to Blutarch having a meeting with the man he's contracted help with the gravel war, who's upset with him over wasting the potential of his quote, war machines. As it turns out, despite the blue team capturing red bases left and right, there isn't a single red merc to be found on any of these bases. During this conversation, it seems to be implied that unlike the red team, the blue team's approach to the war is that instead of using an endless supply of mercs through cloning to try to win, blue team is using high-tech multi-million-dollar tanks to win. After this meeting ends, we then see another message from the engineer, who immediately ends up informing us that the Devilman managed to survive being shot by the medic purely because of the helmet he was wearing. Apparently, according to the engineer, the last message was cut short, and the reasoning behind it was because the mutants have learned to cut the power by destroying the generator at night, in a move to force the mercs out to fix it. Despite the dread they all feel about having to go out and fix it, the mercs all make a mad dash to the generator to turn the power back on, where we see just how aggressive and smart these clones are starting to get. For instance, the sniper mutant is missing an arm because of his mutations, so he coordinates with the scout to hold his rifle still, or a scout mutant trying to sneak into the base while the mercs are out trying to repair the generator. And it's not just us noticing this development. We can see the engineers also taking note of their use of tactics. After making this observation saying the generator has been fixed, we see a picture of a mutated scout and a bunch of clones with glowing eyes off in the distance, where for a brief moment we can see presumably the scout's thoughts. Interestingly enough, unlike the previous times when we've been shown the thoughts of the mutants, the scout isn't begging to be put out of his misery, but rather he's expressing his desire to overwhelm and drive the normal mercs mad. I wonder if this means that with enough respawns or mutations, the mutated mercs will eventually lose whatever little shred of humanity they had left in them. Also, when we see this picture, the engineer points out the mutants with the glowing eyes were coming out from the hills, so we can assume that these are the mutants the spy was talking about during his final thoughts. Speaking of spy, we learned some details about the intel he recovered. The intel he recovered ended up consisting of drawings and receipts for the cloning machine. With this new intel, the engineer starts to feel some skepticism towards Devilman's theory about how the clones are devils, and comes up with his own theory that Redmond is trying to create new mercenaries, but screwed up and maximize everything on the machines. Despite this new theory, the Devilman isn't really convinced this is the case, and frankly, neither am I. I mean, come on! The series takes place in the TF2 universe, where canonically there's magic, ghosts, and the afterlife. So the notion these clones are demonic in nature isn't really unlikely. Despite this, the engineer still believes the solution to the problem is to reset the respawn machines. Also, the engineer makes a comment that's a bit interesting, and that's how the medic knew where the original cloning machine is. So assuming the Infiltrator wasn't the medic we saw in the first installment, then that could mean if the mercs find the medic, he can help shut down the cloning machines. In the next scene, the engineer explains more of the mercs' day-to-day, where he states that most of the mutants hide during the day, which seems to be consistent with their dislike of bright lights like the flares. In the morning, the Heavy suggests that the engineer gets help from the blue team, with his rationale being that both the red and blue team will have a common enemy. Inconveniently, that same day, the mercs spotted a plane in the sky which they fired a distress flare at, only to be completely ignored. After that failed attempt, the engineer decides to follow the suggestion of the Heavy and contacts the blue team. However, in the meantime, we see Blutarch and the contractor having a conversation, where it's revealed that the plane that was spotted was actually a blue team scouting plane. And worst of all, the plane mistook the bodies of the mutants as normal mercenaries, and misinterpreted the flare as a taunt. So now Blutarch is going to send the war machines towards the red team, giving our protagonists one more thing they have to worry about. After Blutarch gives the okay to send the war machines, the scene then changes again, where we finally get to see someone we haven't seen in a while. And that's the real medic. It seems like his state of mania has ended, and is now having a conversation with the blue engineer, who fills him in on the distress signal they received. In this conversation, the medic contextualizes a bit the situation that led him to being left in that boarded up room. As it turns out, the medic was completely unaware of why he got left behind, and why nobody looked for him, though as we know, it's probably because there was a clone pretending to be him. Also during this conversation, the medic reveals that he's already well aware of just how bad the cloning machine is, and much like the Devilman, also refers to the mutants as devils. Honestly, it makes sense that despite being a scientific man, the medic believes in demons. After all, he has canonically made a deal with Satan himself. In this conversation, the medic remarks that he's always felt like cloning was a bad idea, and that a machine can't make a soul, which is a line that seems to be focused on when the scene changes again. In this next scene, the medic confirms our suspicions that something supernatural and demonic is happening here, and that's that Redmond has turned to dark arts, just so he could have the power to win the gravel war. Unfortunately for Redmond, however, he ended up not having control over any of the power he was given, which is presumably why these clones are running amok. After dropping this piece of info on the blue engineer, the medic then makes an Emesis Blue reference, and the episode ends with an image of the blue war machine moving towards the red base, while being stalked by the clones in the hills. We also see the text that says Redmond is our enemy, intermittently flashing, where the name Redmond is replaced with Redemond. So this installment is where the series starts to shift away from the analog horror format, and starts to incorporate new aspects of the plot. The main one, of course, being the impending attack from Blue Team. It's actually pretty interesting. Unlike in the base game where the Blue Team is just like the Red Team, where they just endlessly die and respawn, in this series, it seems like the Blue Team doesn't utilize any sort of cloning or respawning machine, but rather, they just use high-tech weaponry. I'm just curious about how the Blue Team getting involved will affect the plot. Will they just be another thing our protagonists will have to worry about? Or will the Blue Team become allies with our protagonists when they see how bad the situation is? And speaking of the situation our protagonists are in, this is something we finally get a concrete confirmation of Devilman's theory about the clones being devils. Though this does have me wondering how exactly these clones are demonic in nature. I'm sorry, that's the last time I'll make that joke. But seriously, comparing the inner thoughts we see the mutated scout have in this installment, and the inner thoughts of the scout and clones, means there has to be some sort of shift in the mutants internally. Assuming these clones are like possessed by demons or something, then maybe that means that when a clone dies and becomes mutated further, they're more susceptible to the possession of a demon? I don't know. This demon stuff is just really making my head hurt. Well, regardless, in this installment there was a small detail that was mentioned that I feel like could easily be overlooked. And that's how the mutants aren't really out that much during the day. We know the mutants seem to really hate fire and bright lights, so it does make sense that they would hide during the day. The only thing I'm curious about here is why are they so scared of fire and lights? I mean, come on! Hell in TF2 is canonically full of fire, so wouldn't they feel at home when getting burned? Then again though, it does seem like hell's a bit dark and underground, so, you know, maybe they're just photosensitive. Plus, we aren't really sure yet how the demons are possessing the clones, so it very well could also just be that the clones are sort of animalistic, and just acting on instinct. However, even if they are acting on instinct, we do also learn from this installment that these mutants are getting smarter, as we now see them using proper tactics to get the normal mercs, such as forcing them out so they can sneak into the base, or even helping each other out when attacking normal mercs. Now, the last thing I want to mention is the return of the medic. With the reveal that the medic's been saved, things make a whole lot more sense now, and I'm not just talking about him flat out revealing the truth about the cloning machine. It didn't really sit right with me how in one installment he seemingly got mad with gouged out eyes, and then next installment he's all normal again. Seeing as how he doesn't seem to be aware why he got left behind, we can infer that the reason he was in the boarded up mineshaft wasn't because the team isolated him, but rather, the medic clone trapped him there so he could take his place. The only thing I'm not sure about though is if it was a medic who gouged out his own eyes, or if it was a clone that did it. Sure, I know this sort of seems like a small nothing of a detail, but I feel like it would help fully paint the picture of what happened. We know the medic went mad trying to solve the issues with the cloning machine, so if it was himself that tore out his own eyes because of his insanity, then it would mean that both the medic clone, as well as the clones in general, are very opportunistic. It would display just how insidious these clones are. However, if it was a clone that tore out the eyes of the normal medic, then it could mean that these clones are a lot smarter and way more malicious than they're letting on, which could also display how insidious these clones are, just for a different reason. Well, no matter the circumstances that led the medic to be in the situation he's in, we absolutely can say that these clones have a lot more going on than what meets the eye. Well, hopefully we can get some answers to all our questions about how dangerous these clones are in the next installment, Savior. This episode opens with another character we haven't seen in a while, that of course being the spy, who ends up finding himself inside the respawn machine, seemingly unaware of where he is and also having visible mutations from respawning so much. When he steps outside the respawn machine, we see that things look a little bit different than the last time we saw the outside of the machine. And by that, I'm of course referring to the pile of bodies and fucking Christ, okay! Just a bunch of mutants and a goat man waiting outside the machine, who end up gunning down the spy and then dismembering him. After that, we then get given a title card, where we see various letters capitalized, where when we spell them out backwards, it spells demon. When the title sequence ends, we end up seeing the mercs during the day who are mourning all the dead or presumed dead members of the team. After we see all the mercs mourning, we then see another transmission from the engineer, who immediately drops new information about the cloning machine and the respawning process onto the viewers, and that being how the machine implants memories into the clones from the machine's database. This might explain a bit as to why the more heavily mutated clones seem to be more aggressive towards the normal mercs. Just like how there's faults and errors when the machine creates a body too much, that probably means that there's also faults and errors with the memories that get implanted when a merc gets created too often. The engineer explains that the only way for them to remember anything when they respawn is to leave reminders for themselves so they can retain their humanity, and not remain mindless killing machines. After this big info drop, we return to seeing the mercs during the day, who reveal they've been getting their ammo this whole time by looting the bodies of the mutants. The only problem here, however, is that the mutants wisened up a bit, and aren't bringing surplus ammo with them anymore, leaving the mercs in a bit of an ammo deficit. Despite this, the Heavy keeps his chin up, and devises a plan to utilize a small amount of ammo and dropped weapons the mutants had to make new weapons. After a bit of a gearing up sequence, we then see the blue team converging onto the red team base, where the blue team discovers something a bit strange on their way to the base, and that's how the local wildlife had been seemingly killed in a very sloppy manner. And it turns out they haven't seen just like 1 or 2 dead animals. No, the number is somewhere around like 100 animals. Despite being put off by this, they decide to keep moving, and by nightfall, the blue team convoy stops, where they're met by a sight that's so horrifying that they immediately want to turn back. But before they can, the blue team sniper gets shot in the throat with an arrow, and the tank that's with him gets blown up. Instead of being deterred by what they heard over the radio, the rest of the convoy decides to move forward and investigate what happened. And that's when we get to see what the sniper and scouting tank saw. A wall made of clone corpses. Not only that though, but the sniper's body and the tank that was blown up got added to the wall too. And that's when we discover another way that these clones are getting smarter. It turns out they weren't just using the tank as a decoration, but rather the clones had commandeered it to ambush the blue team. Though the blue team was expecting this. And all things considered, they actually held their own pretty well against the mutants. The only issue being that the tank ambush wasn't the only dirty trick they had up their sleeves. As it turns out, some of the clones have explosives strapped to themselves that they use to destroy the tanks and drive the mercs out there inside the tanks. And that's when we see probably one of the most fucking overpowered clones I've ever seen in my entire life. And that's the triple sniper. Like, dude, this is just like not even fair. Despite holding out for as long as they could, the blue team still got overwhelmed, and only the Conqueror tank was able to retreat successfully. Presumably, while all this is happening, we see the sniper on guard duty, where, concerningly, he seems to be dozing off. Though, before he can fall asleep, he gets awoken by the sound of a mutant, and when he opens his eyes, he's put face to face with that fucking horrifying scout creature staying no more than like 3 feet away from him. Interestingly though, this thing doesn't seem to be aggressive towards the sniper, which seems to reinforce my theory from earlier that the thing isn't really malicious. I mean, maybe this could be on account of him having no arms to attack the sniper with, or maybe he actually has retained some amount of his humanity. Now, something interesting to take note of here is that the scout seems to take an interest in this can of bonk, almost as if some part of him remembers his enjoyment of the drink. Suddenly, the scout seems to know something to its right, and then leaves, which then leads the sniper warning the pirate that the scout may be heading over to him. Interestingly, the sniper's also given the scout a nickname, meaning this thing seems to visit the mercs regularly, and is docile enough that none of them decide to shoot him. Now, although the scout mutant isn't really much of a threat seemingly, while the mercs are sleeping or guarding other areas of the base, we see something that's very alarming. A mutant that appears to be a spy, who's finally discovered a way past the engineer's sentries, by carrying a busted dispenser to prevent them from detecting him. Meanwhile, we see the engineer who seems to be thinking about everyone on the team that's been lost. And when we see him thinking about the spy, we see more of what the spy's thoughts are, where he expresses his resentment for the engineer and how he's being tormented because of him. Suddenly, his thoughts are interrupted by the sounds of running, and that's when we see the spy mutant attack the engineer, where it gets a few good stabs on him before it gets shot. And with that, the clones now decide to rush at the base, where we end up seeing a battle sequence, where it turns out that the spy mutant that attacked the engineer wasn't the only mutant that snuck in, and one of them almost got the sniper. Also, in the background of this battle, we end up seeing these strange pillars of light. I'm really curious to know what these could be. Rise, it seems like the mercs are holding their own. Things go south quickly when the pyro gets hit multiple times with arrows from that fucking bullshit triple sniper. God, I just can't get over how ridiculously overpowered this thing is. Right as it seems like it's all over for our protagonists, we then suddenly hear the sound of the Conqueror, which we see drive on top of a cliff and begin firing at the mutants, giving our protagonist a window to escape. The following morning, our protagonists meet with the tank crew, where the engineer expresses relief that the blue team got his distress signal, and then they totally get faked out into thinking the blue team's gonna shoot them. Despite them being saved by the tank crew, and they're being friendly towards the red mercs, the blue spy and heavy end up revealing that they never received any distress signal, and they're sent here to destroy the base. However, with the shared enemy in the form of the mutants, both teams end up forming a temporary alliance. As the blue team explains why they're at the red base, the blue spy explains that they weren't really able to retreat, as all the gunned down animals in the woods that surround the Conqueror, forcing them to move in one specific direction, until they could see the strange beams of light that led the blue team to the base. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted when the blue engineer arrives via teleporter, and with him is none other than the red medic. As the red team is reuniting with the medic, the blue soldier and engineer have a conversation about the current situation, and the engineer reveals he seems to have discovered something particularly alarming about the red team they wants to talk about in private. The scene then fades to black, and we return to seeing the red spy in the respawn machine, who's at this point gone through multiple mutations now. And we learn that while in the middle of respawning, he seems to retain all of his memories, but the moment the door opens, he forgets them all. With the realization that sooner or later he'll be physically incapable of running away, he tries to force himself to remember that he needs to run the moment the doors open. But disturbingly, like always, he immediately forgets this. And when the doors open, we see a whole pile of spy bodies and ripped off legs. The scene then cuts to black. The episode then ends with a shot of a robot spy in Coaltown, where it sees 3 beams of light in the sky. And notably, the text at the end of the episode says, "Redmond is my enemy," with the word "my" being gray. So, in this installment, we see just how different the mutants are now in comparison to the beginning of the series. And I'm not just talking about that triple sniper that I love harping on so much. No, these mutants are getting, like, scary smart. Of course, the most obvious instance of this are the mutant spies that managed to sneak past the engineer's seemingly foolproof defense system. Although at first I was a little confused as to how the clones could be getting smarter, seeing as how every time they respawn, they're just fed whatever memories are inside the system of the respawn machine, I think this installment opens the door for a few theories as to why they're getting smarter. Now, my first theory is why the clones are getting smarter has to do with the aforementioned artificially implanted memories. It seems like the mutants in this goat guy have totally commandeered the cloning machine. So it really wouldn't be too much of a stretch to assume that the mutants or the goat man have been loading more information in the cloning machine, so that the mutants can retain enough information so that they can have a tactical advantage over the red mercs. Though, there's a couple issues with this theory. The first one being we still don't even know how the memories get put into the machine or how it implements the memories into the clones. So, as far as we know, it could be too convoluted of a process for the clones or Goatman to figure out on their own. The other glaring issue with this theory is that if this were the case, wouldn't the spy be basically brainwashed after his first respawn? Actually, hold on, speaking of the spy respawning, I'm just still totally lost in how this respawning cloning machine works. Does this machine both create clones and also respawn existing people? Cause we've seen spy mutants existing at the same time as our spy protagonist. But then why is he relatively normal, but these mutants are deranged killers? Maybe there's just something I'm missing here, but the logic of the respawn machine is just confusing the absolute hell out of me. But I'm going really off track here. So let's circle back to my theories on why the mutants are getting smarter. Another possibility as to why the mutants are getting smarter might have something to do with the mutants camping the respawn machine. See, it seems like they're almost vetting the clones to see if they're going to be killing machines like all the mutants that have been attacking the mercs, or if they're still normal like the spy. So, if that's the case, then maybe it means that whenever a clone is deemed worthy, these mutants that do the vetting provide the fresh mutants new information, such as maybe how the destroyer sentries work and how they could sneak around them. Also, while we're talking about these mutants in front of the respawn machine, let's just address the elephant in the room real quick and talk about this Goatman thing. Now, I'm just 99% certain that this isn't even a mutant, but rather a demon from hell overseeing the creation of the clones. This does make sense, seeing as how it's totally out in the open now that there's something demonic going on with the mutants. Though, what I want to know is, what exactly is this goat guy's purpose? Is he here to make sure that no, quote, sane clones make it through? Or is he somehow involved in the respawning process, and by extension, the increasing intelligence of the clones? Well, at the very least, I'm fairly certain he's involved in creating some of the mutations that we've seen with the clones. Now, my main reason for thinking this is because towards the end of this installment, the spy thinks to himself that sooner or later, he won't have legs anymore that he can use to run away with. So, this could mean that the Goatman ripping off the spy's leg at the beginning may have been him trying to force a mutation in the spy that would make him respawn without a leg. After all, this wasn't just a little one-off thing. No, if you were paying attention when the door of the respawn machine opened towards the end of this installment, you could see a fucking pile of removed legs in front of the door. This does raise a bit of a question, however, as to why he's trying to incapacitate the spy, as I'm pretty sure a spy without legs is pretty useless in combat. Honestly, it might just be nothing more than he just wants to make the spy suffer. It would make sense, as this could be that he's punishing the spy for resisting and fighting against the clones. The only other reason I could really think of as to why he keeps torturing the spy is that he's trying to psychologically destroy him as fast as possible so he can be added into the mindless masses. But I don't know. What do you think? And while we're on the topic of the mutants, there's another elephant in the room that I gotta address. It did this thing! Now, despite the fact the scout thing is fucking terrifying, it's worth noting that not only is it completely docile, but also it seems like none of the mercs have decided to kill it, and they even seem to have given it a nickname. But the big question here is, why is the scout so docile? Well, if you had asked me this question in any previous installment, I'd have absolutely no clue. But I think this installment has dropped a big enough piece of information that could explain it, and it all circles back to the spy. See, despite the fact that this cloning and respawning machine makes hardly any sense to me, the sequences of the spy respawning leads me to believe this thing is the original scout. See, if there's any big takeaway from the spy's respawning sequences, then it's that the original mercs can respawn and retain their humanity, while also having psychotic clones being made simultaneously. So this could mean that the scout thing is the end result of what the goat man is doing to the spy. Maybe the original scout's been mutilated and psychologically destroyed so much to the point where he's just left as this thing. Am I cooking with this theory or what? Now, there's one last thing I want to bring up, and that's these bright lights in the sky. I don't really have any concrete theories of what these beams of light could be, but my best theory is that these are probably related to the respawn machine. More specifically, I think that these beams of light could be related to the teleporters we saw in the front of the doors of the respawn machine. What's my evidence to back this theory up, you might be asking? Well, it's quite simple, really. I don't have any. I just figured that if there's so many mutants in the woods, and these beams of light are in the woods, then that could mean that these beams of light are wherever the teleporter exits are. Assuming that's the case, then I have to wonder, what the hell are the mutants doing in Coal Town? And why do they need 3 teleporter exits there? Well, hopefully we'll get a more concrete answer in the, as of recording this, final episode for the time being, Machina. This episode opens with an ominous 1-to-1 recreation on a chessboard of the mercs uniting at the end of the last installment, as well as Blutarch and his investor being depicted as demons, and also Greyman's robots with a scale implying that demons are more powerful than robots. It then ends up being revealed that this board is being looked at by Redmond, who's wearing a demon mask, alongside 2 other demons. After this intro sequence, we return to where we left off in the last installment, where I think we finally get an answer to what the bright lights in the sky are, which I think might confirm my theory that these lights are related to respawning in some way, since the red team spawn in Coal Town has a bright red glow emanating from inside, and a beam of light being directly above it. But forget the beams of light, the more important thing to take note of here is that it seems like the clones are starting to gear up against the robots, and have even built this big fucking train tank thing. After seeing the mutants set up for what I'm assuming will be an attack against Greyman's robots, we then return to where we left off with the red spy respawning. Here, we see the mutants waiting right outside the respawn machine, ready to game end the spy for the umpteenth time, to keep perpetuating the cycle of him respawning and mutating. Of course, once the doors open, the spy loses all of his memories, but when he sees a pile of mutilated clones of himself in the teleporters, he tries to remember what he'd forgotten, and surprisingly, he actually did manage to remember what he told himself, and that's that he has to get to the teleporters. So, with this revelation, he makes a mad dash for the teleporters, and he gets grabbed and shot. However, when the goatman inspects his body, it's somehow already cold. It's then revealed that the spy did some sneaky sleight of hand work, and stole the mutant spy's dead ringer when he got grabbed. He then takes a random teleporter before the mutants could react, and he ends up being taken to Turbine, where he ends up grabbing all of his missing equipment before continuing to make as much distance from the teleporter as possible. Though, the spy mutant and goatman are in hot pursuit, and they seem to have arrived shortly after the spy grabbed his disguise kit. And holy shit, this thing moves fast! As it turns out, there's even more teleporters inside the intel room, which means that there's basically no way for the mutant or goatman to find him now. So, as punishment for letting the spy escape, the goatman unloads his entire shotgun into the mutant. But as a frankly really stupid move on the spy's end, he actually didn't take any of the teleporters. And actually, he just disguised himself as one of the dead bodies in the room. And, as an even stupider move, the spy thought it would be a great idea to try to backstab the goatman when he ran out of ammo. And of course, it went about as well as you can imagine. Realizing his astronomical fuck-up, the spy makes a run for it, and as he goes up the stairs towards the spawn room, he decides it would be a great idea to try to trick stab the goatman. Yeah, like that's ever gonna work. It didn't work the first time. What? How does that make any sense? One backstab didn't do anything, but a second one was enough to do him in? Okay. After that frankly ridiculous kill, the spy returns to the teleporter he arrived through to sap it. And right before he places the sapper, some fucking 4-armed bird scout demon thing enters the teleporter, and ends up going through one of the teleporters in the intel room. After that, he saps the teleporter he arrived in, and in his infinite brilliance, saps every single one of the teleporters in the intel room, except for the one he takes. Is he stupid? Now anyone that could be looking for him is going to know exactly the route he took. This spy, I swear to fucking God. When he takes this random teleporter, he makes it some room that appears to be heavily guarded despite not seeing anyone else around. And before he can figure out a game plan, he hears someone taking the teleporter he just arrived from, which ends up being one of the faceless mutants. Here it's revealed that this room is sort of a clone vetting room, where these 4 medic demon things inspect the mutants that come through here. If they deem them acceptable, they let the mutants through the teleporter. Something interesting to note here is that once this mutant soldier gets the all clear, it taunts before leaving. Right after this mutant soldier leaves, we see another mutated soldier. However, this one actually seems to have retained some of his humanity. Actually, I wonder, is this soldier the original soldier the same way our spy protagonist seems to be the original spy? I'll explain a bit more why I think this in the analysis section of this installment.
Oh my god, bro.
Anyways, unlike that soulless soldier mutant, this soldier seems eager to escape, and makes a mad dash towards the exit teleporter on the other end of the room. But of course, he gets stopped by the medic demons. And honestly, all things considered, he makes a pretty solid effort in trying to pretend to be a mutant. Oh, never mind. You are so unbelievably cooked, dude. After inspecting him, the demons seemingly give the soldier the all clear, but once he moves towards the teleporter, he's instantly executed. After watching that unfold, the spy hatches a plan where he has to trick the demons into thinking he's a mutant. So, with that, he walks forward and does his best to deceive the demons. However, once one of them pulls out a gun, the spy gets visibly nervous and starts shaking. Despite this though, the demons give the spy the all clear. That's when the spy suddenly remembers what the faceless soldier did before leaving, and that's doing a taunt. So, the spy does his revolver taunt, and with that, the demons let him go. Wait, a thought just occurred to me. The logic of taunts in this universe low-key kind of make no sense to me. Like, are taunts just one of those things that are just like ingrained into the mercs' minds? Cause if the series takes place in universe, then that means that the taunts aren't just a gameplay mechanic. It's a conscious decision for the mercs to rub a wind in the enemy's face. So does it mean that the soldier just like naturally knows to take the L taunt? Or the spy just naturally knows the tie adjusting taunt? Maybe I'm just being a bit nitpicky, but this is really confusing the fuck out of me. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. After the spy escapes, the scene then switches back to Coal Town, where we see that Olivia and Greyman seem to be gearing up against the clones. And we also learn potentially why the Red Engineer's messages haven't seemed to reach the past. As it turns out, Greyman's been intercepting them this entire time. We also end up receiving further confirmation that these beams of light are in fact teleporters, and that Greyman is intending on sending his robots to go destroy each of the 3 teleporters in the area. With that, we see an intense battle break out between the mutants and robots. It truly is a battle of man versus machine. Also, holy fuck! Okay! And here I was thinking the triple sniper is overpowered as shit. But now, we have 5 Machina snipers fused to a giant brass beast heavy. As this fight unfolds, the demons seem to invoke an eclipse to happen, which seems to make the mutants even stronger. We also see a scout bird thing that we saw earlier enter the battle, which ends up destroying the artillery. Despite this buff from the eclipse, the robots had even more bullshit weaponry than the mutants, and ultimately were able to destroy all 3 teleporters. After that, the scene changes again, where this time, we see 2 fort, or I guess more like 1 fort, seeing as how the red base seems to have been totally destroyed. Come on, who liked that one? That was a good joke, right? Here, we learn the mercs that the Gorge base aren't the only group of normal mercs being terrorized by the mutants. As it turns out, the situation on 2 fort's gotten so bad that the last living red and blue team members have formed an alliance against the mutants. As it turns out, the reason the red team base was destroyed was because of an explosion that caused the mutants to appear and attack everyone. We then learned the remaining blue team members want to try to contact headquarters to inform them on the situation that's unfolding on 2 fort. However, as it turns out, the only way for them to contact headquarters is to go down into the blue team basement, which has a strange bird-head sniper lurking inside. So, because this isn't an option for them, the blue dumb man has a plan to use the dead engineer's building tool to make a teleporter to try hopefully make it to another blue team base and get some help. After the 4 mercs hatch this plan, the scene then changes to a location called Base Mountain Lab, where we see another group of red team mercs fighting against the mutants. As it turns out, at this base, both the administrator and Miss Pauling are here. And good lord, why is that thing here too? Wait a minute. So, does this mean the smiling scout thing isn't exclusive to Gorge base? Does this mean the scout thing that stared at the sniper is actually maybe not the original scout? Let's speculate more on that later. Here, the administrator expresses her dislike of the normal clones, due to their increasing self-awareness, and even asks Miss Pauling to execute them after they all escape from the mutants. And even though this sounds really callous, there is actually an important reason for this. And that's how cloning in this universe is extremely illegal. Like, not just regular TF2 levels of illegal, but like, so illegal that would be too much for the administrator to handle. So, as their only available option to fix and cover up the situation, Miss Pauling and the administrator decide to get help from Saxton Hale. The scene then changes again, where we see the Gorge base again during the day, with our red team protagonists relaxing and eating blue team rations. During this little break of theirs, the mercs start discussing plans on how to deal with the mutants, and the medic explains he's created a portable respawn machine, which are pretty much just a portable respawn thingies that are used in MVM. However, with the reveal of this new invention, the sniper ends up asking a bit of a strange question, and that's if the respawn machine will work on the engineer. After posing this question, he reveals that someone's been tampering with everyone's reminders, and points out that everyone stayed the same age for the past 20 years, with the sole exception of one person, that being the engineer. Apparently, the engineer this entire time has been repeating this conversation over and over again with both the spy and sniper. As it turns out, the reason he's been messing with everyone's reminders is because he doesn't like all the stress that comes with having everyone on the team demand to go home. He also ends up revealing how the original versions of the mercs initially died, with some being admittedly very comical, while others being extremely tragic. The only merc the engineer isn't certain about being a clone or not is the Pyro, who's apparently been in the team longer than anyone else. Curiously, the Pyro seems to have a habit where they keep trinkets from each merc arranged in the exact same order as the blueprints in the respawn machine, which is apparently classified information. With this knowledge, the mercs decide to assume that the Pyro isn't a clone, and they should also assume the Pyro won't be able to respawn the Meg's respawn machines. After this discussion sequence, we then see a shot of the sniper seeing the scout mutant thing watching him from afar, where he gives it a friendly nod before the scene then cuts to black. This episode then concludes with two very brief scenes, the first of which being a continuation of where we left off with the spy, who teleports to an air duct where a red soldier holds him at gunpoint and seems to recognize the spy. The second scene we see is of Redmond with the two demon mercs, and as it turns out, we also discover that Redmond this whole time has been working with none other than Marasmus. The episode then ends with an image of Marasmus, Redmond, and the medic demons, with the text this time reading, "Redmond is my slave," with the word "my" being green. Okay, I'm gonna be so for real, this installment totally fucking lost the plot in my opinion. Not to say I didn't like it or anything, it was definitely very interesting and entertaining, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit confused by how the series went from being a story about the horrors of respawning and cloning, to a fucking robot and demon war. I don't want to sound too critical here, because clearly a lot of care and passion has been put into the series, but I definitely think things jumped the shark a little bit here. But enough of my criticisms. Let's analyze this episode. Now, surprisingly, there actually isn't a ton to analyze for this episode, despite the sheer length of it. Though, there are still a few things I want to discuss. First and foremost, let's talk about the Red Spy and his escape. In this episode, we learn that despite the fact that respawning wipes everyone's minds, somehow the spy managed to resist it, and remember to beeline for the teleporters. But this raises a bit of a weird question for me, which I sort of posed earlier in the section where I analyzed Savior. I've already mentioned how the logic of the respawn machine is seriously confusing for me, but if we're completely running in the assumption that this machine both clones and respawns people, then I think it would be fair to assume that the spy is the original spy. Now, what makes it so important the spy is the original has to do with him somehow brute forcing himself to keep a thought while respawning. If this is the original spy, then that means we can safely assume he's probably been respawning hundreds of thousands of times at this point. And he also more than likely has tried to retain memories previously during the respawning process. So it wouldn't be impossible to assume that what could have happened is he's tried brute forcing remembering things so much, they almost sort of developed a muscle memory for remembering certain things, like how he needs to run to the teleporters. There is another possibility though on why the spy managed to keep his thoughts after respawning, and that's simply that the machine fucked up somewhere in the memory wiping process. I mean, it isn't too far-fetched to assume that. It's definitely more plausible than the spy having muscle memory of certain thoughts. We know the machine's fucked up before with making deformed clones, and with how much the demons and mutants seem to be instantly spawn killing the spy, I honestly wouldn't be too surprised if the respawn machine were overloaded even more than it currently is. And while we're on the topic of the spy respawning, I think we should talk about the Goat Man again. Well, I guess not just the Goat Man, but rather, all these new demons. It's pretty clear now that the demons have gotten comfortable enough to start being out in the open on the front lines, such as this Owl Sniper or Bird Scout. Though, what I'm not sure about is why they're showing up only now. If we are assuming that the clones are being possessed by demons, then maybe this means that the appearance of these demons are a part of the natural progression in the mutation process of the clones. Now, what I mean by this is throughout this entire series, we've seen the mutants get progressively more and more fucked up, both physically and psychologically, becoming more and more demon-like. So what this could mean is that the more the mercs get cloned, the more control the demons have over the clones, to the point where maybe the demons start physically manifesting themselves in the mutants. I mean, after all, each of the demons we've seen so far seem to still be in the bodies of the mercs they're clones of. Another likely possibility on why the demons are suddenly so prevalent has to do with the reveal of the involvement of Marasmus. Although we really don't have much to go off of with him and his involvement for the time being, as he really just made a brief couple second long appearance, we can definitely make a few solid assumptions here. In regards to the presence of the demons, we know that in the TF2 canon, Marasmus is deeply involved in black magic and demonic shit. So it could totally be possible that Marasmus just summoned all these demons utilizing his knowledge of black magic. Though, it has been a hot minute since I've read deep into the lore of TF2, much less the lore of Marasmus, so admittedly, I don't exactly know how strong his canonical connection is to demons and shit. So feel free to give me a bit of a refresher in the comments down below. Now, another assumption we can make here is that Marasmus is the one that Redmond made a deal with. Initially, I thought that Redmond simply made a deal with Satan, similarly to how the medic had in the comics. But with the end screen saying that Redmond is my slave, it actually more than likely means that Redmond sold his soul away to Marasmus of all people. This just raises a question though of what could Marasmus possibly be getting out of this deal with Redmond? Like sure, we know Marasmus obviously wants power, that's sort of a given, but why work with Redmond? Marasmus could probably achieve his goals of absolute power by himself if he felt so inclined. Unless of course it's less to do with Redmond himself and more to do with what Redmond has. That of course being the respawn machine. Maybe the respawn machine is just the thing that Marasmus needs to achieve his goals. And based on everything the administrator said in this installment, I think we can safely say that there's no way in hell Marasmus could ever get his hands on a respawn machine by himself. So he has to finesse his way into getting access to one. And who better to finesse than one of the Mann brothers, who will do quite literally anything to win the gravel war. I don't know, that's just my best theory on what his motivations could be. What do you all think? Now, another thing I want to briefly touch up on is that scout thing we saw in the mountain base sequence. This thing looks nearly identical to the one we saw in Gorge base, which one, makes my theory about the scout thing being the end result of constant mutilation on respawning probably wrong. But two, it might mean that the scout thing on Gorge isn't necessarily the original scout. There really isn't much to go off here on what it could be then, so I think we should just go with the most basic explanation. That being that these scouts are a mutant variation, similarly to the faceless mutants or the triple sniper mutant. But who knows, maybe there's a key detail I'm missing here. Now, the last thing I want to quickly talk about before I end this video is the soldier the spy runs into at the end of this installment. Obviously, the soldier seems normal, and that's cool and all, but I think the real things we're talking about here are the items he has with him. Specifically, the photo of the Dead Man's eye and the can of bonk. Both these things have been shown to hold some sort of significance. When it comes to the can of bonk, the Gorge-based scout mutant thing seems to take a lot of interest in the drink, almost like it makes him remember something. As for the photo of the Demo Man's eye, we know that Demo's eye socket has a special ability to see the mutants as demons. So then, that raises a very important question of how the soldier could possibly know what the importance of these things are. Hopefully in the next installment we'll get some proper answers, but for now, that's all there is for the time being. I'm very curious to know what direction the story's going to go in the future. I know it was a bit critical at some points, but overall, the series is very fascinating, and it's really cool seeing the improvement of quality as the series goes on. Like, the first episode mostly consisted of still images and black screens, but for the latest installment, there are lots of action sequences that are fully animated. Once again, be sure to show the creator lots and love of support, and let me know in the comments down below if you want me to cover the series again in the future. But that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching if you still are, and until next time.